Welcome back to another one of the Back to Basic tutorials. I hope you've been enjoying everything that we've created so far for you. Now today we're looking at a diagonal arrangement, which as the word says, comes through your container creating some diagonal movement, and it is pretty much halfway between the vertical that we did on week 1 and the horizontal that we did last week. So if you look back at those two videos, it's a combination between that very upright movement, which is classed as a vertical, and then that sideways movements, which is your horizontal design. And I've chosen a container today, which is something that you should all easily be able to get hold of. It's just a very cheap vase that you can purchase at one of the supermarket shops or from those sort of high street stores where you can pick up lots of homeware and different types of items for the house. And this is just an empty zinc container, and one of these plastic dishes that are easily available at your local florist shop sits nicely onto the top there of the container. And one thing you need to consider when choosing a container for the diagonal arrangement is that you choose something that's narrow. So avoid anything that's fat and chunky or low down. The taller and the more narrow the container is, the better it is for you. And pick something when you're beginning that will hold a plastic container on the top. When we come to look at the the diagonal in a more advanced stage, there are different methods of attaching your mechanics and your floral foam at the top. So for today, we're using a wide enough container so that it would hold one of these plastic containers. And with a diagonal arrangement, it is one of the line designs, so we don't have a massed selection of flowers in the middle. So to enable us to keep the design fairly slimline as it comes from one side to the other, we need to work on a smaller section of floral foam. And most of the flower materials that we have today will be coming in from the side of the foam rather than the front and the top. So it's the side of our foam needs to be the thicker part. So if I use this as an example, this is a huge piece of floral foam, and by the time we cover all that foam, we will end up with a very cluttered middle section to the design, and it will spoil that really nice, elegant line that we're trying to create diagonally through the middle. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit of that foam just by removing a section off the top, and I'm also going to slim that down a little bit so we don't have so much foam, and that will sit quite nicely into my plastic container. And also I'm going to remove a little bit from the top section as well. Just makes it a better angled position for us to place our flowers into. So at this stage we need to attach the floral foam to the plastic container itself, and we're going to look at using the floral tape that we've used several times before, and we'll take it all around that container and finish it there on the top. And then I'm going to introduce a new type of mechanic which you maybe haven't seen before, and this is the Oasis Fix or Floral Fix, and it's a little bit like plasticine. Comes on a roll. This is a small commercial size that you'd be able to buy from a florist or from online, and it's a little bit like putty or sort of the old plasticine. And I'm going to place just probably 3 pieces around that edge of my container, and that will act as a little bit of extra support to hold my plastic container to the edge. Just peel off the backing, and we'll do one more, and that will help give me that extra security that I'll need on the container. Now you could have, if you wanted to, placed the tape over the top of the container as well, and that would have given you some extra security. But with this quite elegant line of flowers, sometimes it's very hard then to hide the tape on this side because your flowers are angled away from the container itself. So just another technique and another method. If you haven't got the floral fix, just run your flower tape over the top and attach it to the container so it's nice and secure. Now what I need to check is that's pretty central, so I'm going to just lift it up a minute and turn it around. What I want to do is have the tape running from front to back, because the majority of my flowers are going to come in sideways, and if my tape is running from left to right, then it means I'm restricting the plant material that comes in on the sides. Okay, so you can see I've got a join at the back there, so I need to remember that's the back of my container, and then I've got a little bit of embossed writing on the front. Okay, so let's have a look at the first placement of flowers and foliage. Now I have today some rosemary, and that is a superb example of a line material. So for a diagonal design, you need to pick foliages that represent that line shape. So that's a really good example there with the rosemary. And then I've also got some of the Ruscus. Now this is the soft Ruscus that you would get from a florist supplies. So I have ivy, which will give me my focal section and strengthen the focal point. And the colour is also a really good link with my Ruscus. And then you've seen me use it several times. This is the birch. This is the colour in its natural state. And this is a really wonderful example of line. If you just look at that individual piece, it is superb to create your eye to move up and down away from the container on both sides. Okay, so we're going to start, I think, with the rosemary. And what we're looking to do is to create the same length of rosemary. So cut your rosemary to roughly the same length as your container, and leave enough gap at the end so that you have a nice clear section of rosemary to go into the foam. And I'm going to create 2 of those pieces. So I'm going to line up, just see if we've got a thinner version. There we are, that's a bit nicer. So that one is quite full and compact, it's quite a bushy piece. This one is a little bit more elegant and a little bit more slimline. So I'm going to use that one for my left piece and for my right piece. And because I've cut them both to the same size before we start, then I know that my sides are going to be equal in length. And if you can see straight away, I've got that lovely diagonal shape taking place. Now it doesn't matter how severe you take that angle, but what you have to remember is your angled pieces will be gauged by how tall your foam there is in the middle. So if you have a very short piece of foam, you won't be able to angle downwards. So as well as having a small piece of foam, you do need to have the height. So when I say small, I mean small in volume rather than small in height. Okay, so we've put what is my left hand side, and if you can imagine a line travelling all the way through the design, we need to bring my right placement through, so it's almost repeating and echoing in a line form through the middle. And if we look at it from the side, this one could come a little bit further forward. I'm almost in the middle section there of the foam, and because we have a lot of plant material that will be coming this way, this is why I explained at the very beginning that the width of your foam needs to be wider than the front section. If the front section is very wide, we'll overfill it, and then you won't have that lovely elegant line that we're trying to create. Okay, so that's the first placement in. Now I'm going to repeat that with a different texture, and for me it's going to be the Ruscus. Now it doesn't matter if you don't have a variety of foliages like I have. If you only have one selection of foliage, that's fine, but it's nice sometimes to have a little bit of contrast in the colour and the texture. So I've just strengthened really that line that was coming through from one side to the other with a variant plant material. And at the same time, I'm going to bring now through to the back the same texture of the Ruscus. And this will do two things. It will give me some weight at the back of the container, so actual weight so my design doesn't tip forward. And when you're working in a high container like this, it is really important that you have actual weight towards the back, otherwise it will tip forward quite easily. Now what we don't want to do at this stage is place the back material in this position here, because it's going to completely hide and spoil that diagonal line that we created. So in this area here, we're just going to put some small pieces of the rosemary, continuing that line that we're creating away from the centre. And I'll do the same on this side, but this side will be towards the front. So when you're learning, it's really, I think the hardest part when you're learning is choosing the right materials. And for this design, you need that very slim material that doesn't have a lot of bushy leaves within it, because that will very easily lose that line that we're trying to create. Okay, so we have a little bit of back coverage there without making it too cluttered from the front. If you feel at this stage that this back section here is going to detract away from the line that comes from the side, you can remove it. But what I would suggest is to leave it there until right at the very end, and if you still feel it's too full, we can get rid of it. Okay, so that line is nice and strong from one side to the other. I'm now going to bring a few little pieces of matching foliage through towards the front. The rosemary is just fantastic because it has that very precise line shape to it. Eucalyptus is another good example, so if you have eucalyptus in the garden, that's a brilliant one to use. And then I'm just using at the front some very, very short pieces of the rosemary, and that will help bring the colour of the rosemary from one side to the other, help bring the textures through. You hear me say it most weeks, what we don't want to do is have the rosemary on the outside like two big arms or two wings and nothing linking it together in the centre. So I'm going to continue in those side placements so that we have a continuous line through the middle of the rosemary, sorry. And then I'll do the same with some shorter pieces of the soft Ruscus. Bring them in through the front, and you might be able to tell that I'm angling everything sideways. I'm not bringing anything to the front at the moment. It's all going off sideways. So if you see this piece, it's coming out rather than at the side, rather than coming towards the front. Okay, now the back is still a lot of foam showing at the back, but we'll finish that at the end. Then with my shinier ivy leaves, this is a really good visual link between the shininess of my Ruscus there in the centre. Now if I was to use Ruscus out at the front, it tends to bring your eye forward and spoil that line that comes down from one side to the other. So what we will do here is just bring in the ivy leaves quite low and quite flat towards the front. Gives me a focal point and a resting place for the eye and a different texture there alongside that very fussy rosemary. Okay, so hopefully, I'm just going to move this one slightly. So hopefully at this stage we haven't overfilled that centre section and it doesn't become too dominant there towards the centre. And then I'll use some more of the ivy leaves just to bring the colour and the texture through to the back as well. And I've got a little bit of a gap here, so I'll place in just a small piece of the rosemary. There we are. So hopefully we've got that lovely prominent line down there from one side to the other. And now we've got a good outline shape created, we can start adding some lovely flowers. And today I've got this wonderful rose. Now I don't know the variety of it, but it's almost like the ice cream, the raspberry ripple ice cream. I thought that was a really pretty one to buy. And what we're going to do with these is continue that line down through the middle. Now if I have a choice, I would like to have the smaller heads of my rose. Let's see what we've got. I think it's probably going to be, very, very similar. It's probably going to be these two. So if we think about visual balance, on the outside of our design needs to be the smaller flower. Come in if we can to the bigger flowers in the centre. Now, as somebody that teaches flower arranging and floristry, we all often encourage you to remove the petals from the outside. The guard petals can sometimes be damaged from delivery, and this is an example of one where I've removed the guard petals from the outside, and I felt that we were losing that gorgeous sort of raspberry ripple colour, and we were ending up with something much more apricot in its colour combination. So for today, I'm going to leave those guard petals on, but I think it's something that you have to make your own decision on. If I was a commercial florist, then I would remove the outside petals, because sometimes your customer feels that they're damaged and they're not of very good quality. But for me, it shows the real character of a rose, and I think sometimes when you remove them, it spoils the very natural look of the rose. So from a commercial point of view, we should remove them, but I love them. I love the colour and the texture that they create. Okay, so the foliage is the outline. We don't put our flowers in any longer than the foliage edge and outline shape that we've already created. So I'm estimating, if we just spin that round, that my rose needs to be this length. So to make it easy for yourselves when you're learning, if you cut your two roses to be the same length before you start, then you know that you're going to have them fairly equally placed out on either side. As you become a little bit more confident in what you're doing, then that will come to you a lot more easily and a lot more naturally. And I'm going to remove off quite a lot of the rose petals, the rose leaves, because they do die and look quite sad in the arrangement. Okay, so this is a really good example now of how visually heavy they are at the moment, and they definitely look like two big hands saying hello. And what we need to do is to create that visual link there in the centre. Now I'm going to place the middle flower in next, just so that you can see the sort of pattern that I'm trying to create. And the front flower is going to be very short and almost sitting on top of the foam. And this is going to sit where we've placed those focal leaves there in the middle. And what we're aiming to do with that one is have it sitting so that it's in the middle of the two outer roses. And then hopefully, to create that visual line through the centre, you can see now that we need to place two roses there in the centre. And now it might be becoming a little bit more apparent as to why I needed more depth in my foam right at the very beginning, because nearly all of my flowers are coming in from the side. So we don't want to have a very severe line. We need to have a little bit of a staggered line. So I've placed that one slightly lower down. It gives you a much more pleasing line, a much more interesting line for your eye to follow. And then on the opposite side, almost the same length as this one, we'll bring it in another rose. And you know, when you're practicing, don't worry too much about getting it perfectly lined up. This one I think can be a little bit shorter. But what you do need to be a little bit mindful, of course, if you keep taking your flowers in and out, then you will have very little floral foam left at the end. So hopefully that creates quite a strong visual diagonal line down through the middle. I have quite a bit of foam here at the top which needs covering, and if I do this as an example, if I place this in the middle there quite high, straight away you've lost that diagonal line. So anything you put to fill in and to hide your foam needs to be very short and very manageable, so we don't lose that diagonal line that we've created there down through the middle. Now I'm going to use a combination of the two, Rosemary and the the soft Ruscus, just to fill in those little gaps. Now, as a commercial florist, this is a design that I very rarely do at the moment, and that's probably because it's quite formal in its styling, and floristry at the moment tends to be a little bit more informal, much more natural, and you enjoy the various curves and the different shapes of the fresh flowers. But this is a type of design that would be ideal maybe on a buffet table where it's raised up above the food. It would be great in a reception of maybe quite a modern or contemporary hotel, and maybe instead of the roses you could use anthuriums or some proteas so that you get a much more of the moment look to it. And again, just to strengthen the vertical lines, I've got the birch. So we buy this in commercially, but of course this could be bamboo, any sort of very straight twigs that you might have in your garden. And you don't really have to use any type of second placement like I'm doing here. This is just showing you another way of helping to reinforce that that diagonal line down through the middle. So we'll just bring in a small little section from left, making sure that we don't lose that diagonal line that we've worked very hard to achieve. Some little pieces towards the front, just so that we've got a little bit of link of colour. Now this is a front-facing design, so we often categorise arrangements into all-round or front-facing, and this is a design that would only be seen from one side. There we are, so we have some nice diagonal movement from one side to the other. I think we've just put in a little bit more in this area here. And what we're trying to achieve is to make the lines look like they're coming straight through the foam and out the other side. Now the lovely colouring of those roses I felt matched really well with one of the little heather plants that I have here at the shop. So I thought it would be lovely just to link a little bit of this colour through the middle. And again, if we have a look at the small sections of the heather, that's again is a lovely line shape, a really good example of line. And it brings me what we call a transitional material, which helps to link all the different shapes together. Now what I would avoid in this type of arrangement is gypsophilia or anything that's very full and heavy, because straight away you would lose that lovely diagonal line that you've worked very hard to achieve by placing in a big cluster of gyp there in the centre. It would fill it out and create a very cluttered look towards the middle. And I think for me, I do say it most weeks, when you're learning floristry or flower arranging, it really is about collecting the right types of flowers. If you're trying to do this line arrangement and you have very fussy flowers, then it will be hard to achieve. You don't need a lot of plant material in it. It's a very simple design. Can be done with just carnations or some lovely gerbera. And as I said, if you want to make it a little bit more contemporary, then you would pick bigger, more statement flowers like anthuriums, and you'll end up with, you know, a really pleasing and interesting design. So just a little bit more there of the heather, just so that I've got a link of colour through the middle. And I'll bring a little bit of that through to the back as well, so we've got visual weight through to the back. But I think that's quite a gorgeous design, a beautiful colour combination. Something that is not the easiest of designs to do, but something that you could work towards. And if you think back to the very first week when we did line arrangement, if I just tip that on its side, it is really a line arrangement on its side. And last week when we did the horizontal, I did a design that's very much a floristry piece of work. But again, if I turn this on the side, this is another really good example of a horizontal design if you placed your container at that 90-degree angle. So really, they're all a variation of the line design that we learnt in week 1. So I hope you're enjoying, and I hope you're progressing a little bit with your floral designs. Next week, what are we doing next week? Who knows, I can't remember, but there's going to be a fantastic video for you next week. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget that the Back to Basics tutorials are on a Monday morning at 9:30, and then we do a range of slightly more advanced designs on Wednesday at 7 o'clock in the evening. And very soon, I think it'll be the beginning of December, we'll be coming out with a few Christmas designs that you can do at home as well. So if you want to be notified when a new video is released, then don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell there to be notified, and of course leave us a comment or a thumbs up in the box, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.